Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. So there are an estimated 1.8 billion Muslims, billion with a B, around the world. So as you can imagine, with such a large number of Muslims around the world, there is a large variance of how Muslims live their day-to-day lives, depending on many different factors, both religiously informed, but also not related to religion. For instance, their socioeconomic status or what culture they ethnically grew up in, or nationally that they grew up in, or their education level, and so on. There are many different factors that don't include religion that will inform Muslims' lives. So then bringing it specifically to my own personal experiences, so I grew up and am still currently in the United States, so I can only speak from that perspective. So in the United States specifically, there are about 3.5 a million Muslims estimated. It's a hard thing to calculate exactly, but it's estimated about 1% of the population is Muslim. 1% is really tiny. And so with that in mind, most non-Muslim Americans will go their whole lives without ever meeting a Muslim in person. And what that means is that as someone who is visibly identifiable on the street in public as Muslim, there's a pressure to feel like I'm always on, I'm always being watched. And that is something that I would say is like my biggest struggle, my biggest challenge, is that if I want to wear black, there's a lot of people who just like to wear black. But as a Muslim woman who's easily identifiable as being Muslim, wearing black is a whole like, what am I going to be saying? What am I going to look like? What assumptions are people making about my political beliefs? Or, how, dogmatic it may be if I just wear black. And there's a lot of people who just like wearing black, but it's this whole struggle in my mind when I'm choosing what to wear. And most often I don't wear black because of that. It's not even to my mind. I am just one Muslim, again, of 1.8 billion Muslims. So for myself, in my mind, I can only speak for myself, it is something that I don't even think to do most times, to wear black, for that reason. If I just don't feel like smiling that day, people might look at me and say, oh my gosh, she looks so unhappy, or she looks so scary. Like, what is she thinking? Is she gonna go do some scary thing? If I'm having a bad day, I'm a human being, I have bad days, and I have to go grocery shopping on my bad days too. I have to go pick up a prescription or whatever. And if that is the case, if I'm visibly not like in a happy, cheerful look, I'm a non-threatening mood, there's a lot of connotations around if I am possibly the only Muslim someone who's non-Muslim has ever seen in their lives at all, and had any sort of interaction with at all, like, tellers or, people at registers or something like that, having some little like back and forth conversation. I feel like I have to, be a representative, because like this sense of constantly being watched. So since there are so few Muslims in the West, and again, in my case, the United States specifically, most non-Muslims will have learned, if anything, about Islam and Muslims from the media. And I hope we can all agree that that is highly problematic. And so I won't go too much into detail about that. But because of that, I feel, as someone who's very visibly identifiable in public as a Muslim, that I have kind of been placed with the role of a PR manager, without really my choosing, of both my religion and Muslims, which is slightly different. Again, I won't go into too much detail about that, but about Islam and Muslims. And this can be both empowering, and it can also be definitely a burden. In the way that it is empowering is that I have an active power to go and do something to counter the negative stereotypes and narratives around Muslims and Islam. when I do have a positive interaction with someone, I do know that they're going to go away. And if they hear something in the news in the future, or someone in a conversation mentions something about negatively about Muslims, I know that in their mind it's going to be like, well, I met that person and she didn't seem like that. And it's just going to be that kernel of doubt to doubt this negative narrative that's being fed to them, and just start the dripping of understanding about the differences in how Muslims live their lives, and how the media works to kind of sensationalize a lot of like stories that are very small, like outliers, right? In most cases. And then also, it can very much be a burden because, frankly, I get tired. I do have bad days, like I mentioned. Sometimes I want to think about other things other than what do people think of me, and are they going to, I said I was a little snippy and because I was having a bad day or whatever, or they offended me, and now maybe this person is going to think that all Muslims are like this and Islam is like that. Or maybe they already have stereotypes in their minds, which interacting with me because I'm tired or I don't look super happy and on and, oh, look, I'm so smiley, is going to cement those stereotypes in their minds. And sometimes it would just be nice to like just live my life and be a person, just be Rahimeh, without having to carry the burden of being a PR manager. However, I would say in recent times I have very much been working on feeling more comfortable putting down that responsibility, because ultimately, as a Muslim, I do believe and I do know that it isn't my responsibility and isn't even in my power to sway hearts. So I want to break down my answer to this question into three parts. First, intrapersonally, next, interpersonally, and finally, systemically. So first off, intrapersonally. And what I mean by this is you yourself as an individual. So what I would ask anyone who wants to be an ally, an advocate, or a co-conspirator for, on behalf of, with Muslims, is to have time of deep introspection about what stereotypes, both positive and negative, because positive stereotypes are also problematic. What stereotypes have you absorbed naturally from the media that you were exposed to as a child, that you have been exposed to and consume now as an adult? Maybe from things that adults said in front of you, around you when you were a child. All of us have stuff we have absorbed in these different ways, just about different groups of people. And in this case, what have you absorbed about Muslims that is now your responsibility and you're going to try and unlearn? And I hope very much that this shouldn't be met with a sense of shame, because again, it is completely natural, especially as a child, to absorb messages without having a critical eye of like, is this really true? Where did they get this information? It's natural for a child to just absorb the messages, especially from adults that they rely on for their sustenance, or that they admire or see as people that they learn from, that they love, to just absorb messages from them. And so it's perfectly natural. And even for myself, as someone who's Muslim, who's, a woman who has different marginalized identities, I very much have messages that I have absorbed about other groups that I am actively trying to unlearn, and I'm taking that responsibility. And it's not with any sense of shame, but it is a responsibility that I take seriously, and I hope that you also take seriously, while not feeling paralyzed by shame. So once you have done that introspection work, you've identified the stereotypes that you've absorbed, and for some, to some extent, this will be an ongoing, exercise for you. You're going to have different interactions or exposures to Muslims, and in those cases, other conversations where Muslims come up, and something that you may have not realized was a stereotype that you hold, or a negative feeling about Muslims that you didn't realize until a certain, thing sparked that in your mind, and then you can unlearn it at that point. What I would ask then is to replace those negative stereotypes and those negative messages with information from Muslim sources. So don't go and find some non-Muslim source that, especially an Islamophobic site, unfortunately there are many like that. Try and find sources of information from Muslims themselves speaking about their own lives. And, if you want to learn about the religion of Islam, in an interface sort of manner, there are many resources as well. So there's like Muslims, the people, but then there's also the religion of Islam. And I encourage you to learn about both to replace the stereotypes that you may have absorbed from the media. Next, we have interpersonally. So, what I would encourage you, something that I really like about learning or how to learn about other groups that I don't belong to, is I am a millennial, and so I spend a lot of time on social media. And so, what I would encourage you to do is pick whatever your preferred social media site is, whatever it is, and find Muslim content creators who have different kinds of voices. Find a couple of them at least. And whenever you're on your social media, scrolling through whatever site, you're going to be seeing posts about what is it like to live as a Muslim, to work as a Muslim, religiously, as a member of a non-Muslim community. Again, I'm speaking from being in the United States, so I live in a non-Muslim predominant country. And that's going to be something that you're already doing with your time. You're already on social media anyway. And then you just spend like maybe a minute, 60 seconds, maybe 90 seconds reading the post. And you're able to drip, drip, drip knowledge over time. And it's something that's sustainable because you were already going to be on social media anyway. If you want to be particularly adventurous, I really do encourage going to a mosque in person. Especially during the holy month of Ramadan. There's not really capacity in this video to talk about Ramadan, but I'm sure you can find many resources on what Ramadan is if you don't know already. And that should definitely be part of your learning before going to a mosque. But during Ramadan, many mosques will open their doors to visitors. And I would just say, if you do want to do this, to please contact the mosque ahead of time to let them know that you will be coming. Why? So that you can ask about any etiquette rules that they may have. Mosques, again, 1.8 billion Muslims around the world, there is difference. So just checking in with mosques, for instance, for Muslim women, some mosques may ask that a non-Muslim woman wear hijab to come into the mosque, and some don't ask for that. So just, ask, for some etiquette. And even if they don't need you to do anything, it's a very nice, like, offer of respect and checking in with them ahead of time. But then also, kind of on the more critical side, especially again in the United States context, Muslims have a history of being surveilled by the government, especially post 9/11. And so Muslim communities can be very sensitive to strangers in their mix, and be sensitive to that. So another way for you to be an ally, an advocate, co-conspirator with Muslims is recognize that history and recognize that you might very well have, and I'm sure have very good intentions and want to get to know the community and get to know, your fellow human beings. But there is this history of Muslims are now sensitive to who is this person amongst us who is coming without warning. And so, just again, contacting the mosque ahead of time so they know to expect you. You've picked the date, and then you're honestly going to have a much better time because then they will like welcome you, and someone will be there with you to explain like what everything is. For instance, Muslims don't wear shoes in the prayer area or sometimes in the mosque at all. And for a non-Muslim where that's not a common practice in your religious or spiritual centers, that might be a little jarring at first. And so someone's going to be able to help you with that. So I would really encourage that, especially. And then if you go during Ramadan, when we break our fast at iftar or like the dinner time after sunset, there's going to be a lot of really good food. So I really encourage you to go at that time. And finally, on a systemic level, everyone has a sphere of influence. And it doesn't really matter what the scale is. If you are the head of a corporation, you are going to have thousands of employees that you can impact. Awesome. If you are a stay-at-home parent and you have one toddler, awesome. That is super cool too. And everything in between. If you are in education and you work in a K through 12 system, or if you're in a university, or if you are an entry level employee in a company, whatever it is that you have a sphere of influence, think about what is your sphere of influence and where can you now, with the knowledge of again, from the intrapersonal side, the interpersonal work that you've done, and now bring it systemically. You have some knowledge of Muslims. How can you advocate for Muslims to have their own voice and express their own voice? But if you, for instance, are in rooms where decisions are being made in any different sector where you do have a sphere of influence, how can you advocate for Muslims for inclusion and equity in your sphere of influence? And that would definitely be the steps that I would highly recommend to anyone who wants to be an ally to Muslims.